The distant sound of gunshots echoed through the dusty evening air as Fiona Miller stared out at the horizon, her heart as heavy as the setting sun that cast long shadows across the plains of Wyoming Territory. She hadn't cried in 3 days, and she wouldn't start now, not even as she perched on the fallen cottonwood at the eastern edge of Promise Creek, a town that had promised her nothing but heartaches since her arrival 6 weeks earlier. Spring of 1876 had brought more than wildflowers to the frontier. It had brought change, loss, and a crushing sense of uncertainty that weighed on her slender shoulders. Her fingers absently traced the rough bark of the log beneath her, the only solid thing in a world that had become frighteningly unstable. She didn't notice the approaching horse at first, the soft rhythm of hooves muffled by the prairie grass. It wasn't until the rider dismounted nearby that she realized she was no longer alone. From the corner of her eye, she caught sight of worn leather boots and faded denim, but she didn't turn to look. The stranger said nothing as he settled beside her on the log, leaving a respectful distance between them. He removed his hat and placed it beside him, his gaze fixed on the same distant point that had captured her attention. The silence stretched between them, neither uncomfortable nor comforting, simply there. Minutes passed. The sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold. Finally, without a word, Fiona reached across the space between them and took his calloused hand in hers. His fingers closed gently around hers, and for the first time in days, she felt something besides emptiness. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice rough from disuse. "For what, madam?" His voice was deep, with a slight drawl that marked him as not quite local. "For not asking questions." He nodded, and she finally turned to look at him. Beneath the trail dust and day-old stubble was a face younger than she expected, perhaps 30 or so, with kind eyes the color of a summer storm. "Name's Jack," he said simply. "Jack Reynolds. Fiona Miller." He didn't press for more, just sat quietly holding her hand until the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. When she finally stood to leave, he rose with her. "May I walk you back to town, Miss Miller?" She hesitated, then nodded. "I'd appreciate that." As they walked side by side, her reticule clutched tightly in one hand while the other hung empty at her side, Fiona wondered at the strange comfort she found in this silent stranger's presence. She didn't know it then, but Jack Reynolds would come to mean more to her than any man she had ever known, and the journey was only just beginning. "You're new to Promise Creek," Jack observed as they approached the first buildings of the small settlement. It wasn't a question. 6 weeks yesterday, Fiona replied. "Though it feels much longer. Town can be hard on newcomers." She laughed without humor. "That's one way of putting it." Jack adjusted his pace to match her shorter strides. "You got people here?" "I had my brother." The past tense hung heavy between them. "He sent for me after striking silver in the hills. Said he'd built us a life here." She swallowed hard. 3 days ago, 2 men from the mine brought me his personal effects. Cave in." Jack removed his hat and held it against his chest. "I'm mighty sorry for your loss, Miss Miller." "As am I, Mr. Reynolds." They reached the boarding house where Fiona had taken a room after the news of her brother's death. The modest 2-story structure stood among the saloons and mercantiles that comprised Promise Creek's main street. "Will you be staying in town?" Jack asked, replacing his hat. Fiona looked up at the building that housed her few possessions. "I don't know. I've got enough money to last a few weeks, but after that..." She trailed off, the uncertainty of her future too overwhelming to voice. "I ride for the Triple R, about 10 miles west," Jack said. "If you need anything, thank you, Mr. Reynolds, but I hardly know you." Despite her words, there was no rebuke in her tone. "No, madam, you don't. But the offer stands all the same." She studied him in the lamplight spilling from the boarding house windows. There was nothing particularly remarkable about him, just another cowboy in a territory full of them, and yet something in his steady gaze made her believe him. "Good night, Mr. Reynolds." "Good night, Miss Miller." As she climbed the stairs to her sparse room, Fiona found herself wondering if she would see the quiet cowboy again. The thought brought an unexpected warmth to her chest, the first such feeling since receiving news of her brother's death. Morning came with the crowing of roosters and the clatter of wagon wheels on the street below. Fiona dressed in her second best dress, a simple navy cotton with white piping at the collar and cuffs. Her brother's funeral would be today, a simple affair at the small cemetery on the hill overlooking Promise Creek. The town's preacher, a kindly man named Pastor Wilson, had arranged everything. He'd explained gently that mining accidents were common, and the company had a standard payment for such occurrences. It wasn't much, but it would cover the burial costs and leave Fiona with a small sum. "Your brother was well liked, Mrs. Holcomb," the boarding house proprietress, told Fiona over a breakfast she couldn't bring herself to eat. "Half the town will likely turn out." True to the woman's prediction, a sizable gathering had assembled at the cemetery by the time Fiona arrived. Miners, shopkeepers, and townspeople stood in respectful silence as Pastor Wilson spoke words of comfort and promise that did little to ease Fiona's grief. She stood alone at the edge of the grave, her eyes dry but burning. She had cried enough in private. Here, she would maintain her dignity. It was what her brother Frank would have wanted. As the final prayer was spoken and people began to disperse, offering condolences as they passed, Fiona noticed a familiar figure standing apart from the crowd. Jack Reynolds, looking uncomfortable in clean clothes that still bore the creases of long storage, watched from beneath the shade of an old oak tree. When the last of the mourners had gone, he approached, hat in hand. "I didn't expect to see you here," Fiona said. "Seemed right to pay respects." He shifted his weight. "Didn't know your brother, but any man who'd send for his sister must have been decent." The simple observation, so free of the platitudes she'd endured all morning, broke something loose inside her. A single tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. Jack pretended not to notice. Instead, he gazed out over the town below. "Awful pretty view from up here." Fiona followed his gaze, seeing the settlements sprawled across the valley floor. From this distance, Promise Creek looked almost picturesque, the harsh realities of frontier life softened by perspective. "It is," she agreed. Then, after a pause, "I don't know what to do now." Jack considered this. "What did you do before coming west?" "I taught school in Ohio." She smoothed her gloved hands over her skirt. "But there's already a teacher here. Young man from back east, with proper credentials." "Shame." Jack turned to face her. "Miss Miller, I know it ain't proper, but would you allow me to buy you dinner? The hotel serves a decent meal, nothing fancy, but why?" The question came out sharper than she intended. If he was offended, he didn't show it. "Because you shouldn't be alone today, and I reckon you could use a friend." Friend. Such a simple word, yet it carried weight. Frank had been her only family, and with his passing, she found herself utterly alone in a territory where she knew no one. The prospect of friendship, however unexpected its source, beckoned like a lantern in darkness. "I would be grateful for the company, Mr. Reynolds." His smile was small but genuine. "Jack, please." "Then you must call me Fiona." They walked down the hill together, the spring sun warm on their backs. Promise Creek's main street bustled with the usual afternoon activity, horses tied at hitching posts, wagons delivering goods, men and women going about their business. The Promise Creek Hotel stood at the center of town, a two-story structure that boasted the only restaurant worthy of the name. Inside, white-clothed tables and actual glass windows set it apart from the rough saloons that dominated the town's social life. The hostess, a plump woman with shrewd eyes, assessed them quickly before leading them to a table in the corner. Jack pulled out Fiona's chair with unexpected grace before taking his own seat. "Folks are looking," Fiona murmured, noticing the curious glances from other diners. "Small town," Jack replied with a shrug. "They'll find something else to talk about by sundown." They ordered roast beef with potatoes for Jack, chicken and dumplings for Fiona, and fell into conversation that started hesitantly but soon flowed more easily. "So the Triple R," Fiona said. "Is that a large ranch?" "Fair size." Old man Rutherford runs it with his 2 sons. They're good men to work for, fair with pay and not too hard unless you deserve it. And how long have you been a cowboy, Jack? He considered this. Since I was 16, so going on 14 years now. Started in Texas, worked my way north. That's a lot of wandering. Something flickered across his face. Never found a reason to stay put. Their food arrived, temporarily halting conversation. Fiona realized she was genuinely hungry for the first time in days. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Jack spoke again. What brought you to Wyoming? Besides your brother, I mean. Fiona set down her fork. There wasn't much left for me in Ohio. Our parents died within a year of each other, father from pneumonia, mother from heart troubles. Frank came west first, wrote to me about the opportunities here. She smiled sadly. He was always the adventurous one. And you? I was the cautious one. Always thinking things through, planning ahead. She laughed softly. Fat lot of good it did me. Jack's expression grew serious. Sometimes life doesn't care about our plans. No, she agreed. It certainly doesn't. After dinner, Jack escorted her back to the boarding house, their pace unhurried in the gathering twilight. The street lamps were being lit one by one, pools of golden light appearing along the boardwalk. Thank you, Fiona said as they reached her door. For dinner and everything else. Jack shifted his hat in his hands. I'm heading back to the ranch tomorrow. Won't be in town for a spell. Disappointment bloomed unexpectedly in her chest. Oh, of course. But I could call on you next time I'm here. If that would be agreeable. Fiona found herself nodding. Yes, that would be agreeable. He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his weather-worn face. Good night, Fiona. Good night, Jack. Inside her room, Fiona stood at the window and watched his tall figure disappear down the street. For the first time since arriving in Promise Creek, she felt something like hope stir within her, small and fragile, but undeniably present. The next morning brought new purpose. Fiona knew she needed to secure employment if she was to remain in Promise Creek. Her brother's death benefit would not last forever, and the thought of returning east, defeated, was unpalatable. She dressed carefully in her most professional attire and set out to inquire at the various businesses. The general store needed no help. The milliner was sympathetic but could offer nothing. The hotel manager suggested she try the saloons, his gaze lingering inappropriately, until Fiona coldly informed him she was seeking respectable employment. By midday, her spirits were flagging. She paused outside the newspaper office, gathering her courage before pushing open the door. Inside, the rhythmic clank of a printing press filled the small front office. A spectacled man in his 50s looked up from a desk covered in papers. Can I help you, miss? I hope so, sir. I'm Fiona Miller. I'm seeking employment. The man removed his spectacles, polishing them on his vest. James Whitfield, editor and proprietor of the Promise Creek Chronicle. He gestured to a chair. Please sit. You're Frank Miller's sister, aren't you? My condolences. Thank you, Mr. Whitfield. What sort of employment are you looking for? Fiona straightened her shoulders. I'm educated, sir. I taught school back east for 5 years. I can write well, keep accounts, and learn quickly. Whitfield studied her thoughtfully. Can you type? I've never had the opportunity to learn, but I'm confident I could master it. He nodded slowly. My assistant left last month, married a rancher, and moved to Montana. I've been managing alone, but with the town growing. He trailed off, considering. It wouldn't be teaching, and the pay isn't much, but I do need someone who can write coherently and handle correspondence. Hope surged within her. I would be most grateful for the opportunity, Mr. Whitfield. They discussed terms, and by the time Fiona left the newspaper office, she had secured employment to begin the following Monday. The salary was indeed modest, but combined with careful management of her brother's death benefit, it would allow her to remain in Promise Creek. Walking back to the boarding house, Fiona felt lighter than she had in weeks. She had a purpose now, a way forward. And though she tried to push the thought aside, she found herself wondering when Jack Reynolds might next ride into town. Days turned into weeks as Fiona settled into her new role at the Promise Creek Chronicle. James Whitfield proved to be a fair employer, if somewhat exacting in his standards. She learned to operate the temperamental typewriter, to set simple type, and to transform the editor's scrawled notes into coherent articles. She moved from the boarding house to a small rented room above the millinery shop, which offered more privacy at nearly the same cost. She made acquaintances among the townspeople, particularly the shopkeepers' wives who frequented the newspaper office with notices and announcements. And she watched for a certain Cowboy. Nearly a month passed before Jack Reynolds rode back into Promise Creek. Fiona was returning from delivering the weekly edition to the post office when she spotted him outside the general store, loading supplies into saddlebags. Her heart quickened as she approached, suddenly unsure of herself. Would he remember his promise to call on her? Would he want to? "Mr. Reynolds," she called, her voice steadier than she felt. He turned, and the smile that spread across his face at the sight of her chased away her doubts. "Miss Miller." He tipped his hat. "You're looking well." She was, in truth. Regular meals and purpose had brought color back to her cheeks and a sparkle to her eyes that grief had temporarily dimmed. "As are you." She gestured to his packages. "Ranch business?" "Supply run." He secured the last parcel. "And a chance to make good on a promise." Warmth spread through her chest. "I've taken a position at the newspaper," she told him, "and moved to rooms above Hattie's millinery. Sounds like you've been busy." There was approval in his tone. "I'm glad to hear it." An awkward pause followed, either quite knowing how to proceed. "I'm finished with my errands," Fiona finally said. "If you'd care to walk with me?" Relief flickered across his features. "I'd like that very much." They strolled along the boardwalk, Fiona sharing stories of her work at the newspaper while Jack spoke of life on the ranch. There was an ease between them that belied their brief acquaintance, as if they'd known each other much longer than they had. "The Rutherfords are good people," Jack was saying. "Fair-minded. Not like some of the bigger outfits pushing smaller ranchers off their land. Mr. Whitfield has written editorials about that very issue," Fiona replied. "He believes there's room for everyone if the law is properly enforced." Jack's expression turned skeptical. "Laws spread mighty thin out here." They reached the millinery shop, pausing at the side entrance that led to Fiona's rooms. "Would you?" Jack cleared his throat. "Would you allow me to take you to dinner again? Tonight before I head back to the ranch? I would like that very much." His smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. "I'll call for you at 6 if that suits." "It does." Fiona spent more time than usual preparing for dinner, trying on both of her good dresses before settling on the green poplin that brought out the copper highlights in her chestnut hair. She pinned her hair up in a style more elaborate than her usual workday arrangement, and even dabbed a tiny amount of rose water at her wrists and throat. Jack arrived precisely at 6, hat in hand and wearing a clean shirt under his usual vest. His hair was damp from a recent washing, and he'd clearly made an effort to scrape the trail dust from his boots. "You look beautiful," he said simply. Fiona felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Thank you. You look very nice yourself." Instead of the hotel restaurant, Jack led her to a small establishment at the edge of town. "Mrs. Alvarez makes the best food in the territory," he explained. "It's not fancy, but it's honest." The restaurant was indeed modest, just 6 tables in what had clearly once been someone's front parlor, but the savory aromas wafting from the kitchen made Fiona's mouth water. A plump woman with silver-streaked black hair greeted Jack like an old friend. "Jack Reynolds! I was wondering when you would visit again." She turned assessing eyes to Fiona. "And you bring a lady friend? Bueno! Mrs. Alvarez, may I present Miss Fiona Miller? Fiona, this is Elena Alvarez, the finest cook in Wyoming Territory." The woman's dark eyes twinkled. "Such flattery!" Come, I have a good table for you. Over plates of tender beef simmered with chilies and beans, accompanied by flatbread still warm from the oven, Jack and Fiona continued the conversation they'd begun that afternoon. He told her about growing up in East Texas, the son of a horse trader who'd taught him to ride almost before he could walk. She shared stories of her childhood in Ohio, of picking apples in her grandfather's orchard and reading by lamplight long after she should have been asleep. Why did you become a teacher? Jack asked as they lingered over coffee and a sweet custard that Mrs. Alvarez insisted they try. Fiona traced the rim of her cup with one finger. I love learning. Books, ideas, the way knowledge opens doors. She smiled at a memory. When I was 12, my teacher let me help the younger children with their letters. Seeing their faces when they first understood, when they realized they could read on their own, I knew then what I wanted to do. You miss it? It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. Yes. But the newspaper work is satisfying in its own way. Mr. Whitfield says I have a talent for it. I'm sure you do. Jack hesitated, then reached across the table to cover her hand with his. I'm glad you stayed in Promise Creek. The simple touch sent warmth cascading through her. So am I. After dinner, they walked slowly back toward the millinery shop, either eager for the evening to end. The spring night was mild, stars beginning to appear in the deepening blue of the sky. When will you return to town? Fiona asked as they reached her door. Not sure. Mr. Rutherford's talking about sending some of us north with a small herd testing new grazing land. He shuffled his feet. Could be a few weeks. Disappointment pierced her, sharper than she expected. I see. Jack's eyes were earnest in the lamplight. I'd write to you, if you wouldn't mind receiving letters from a cowhand. I would like that very much, she replied softly. He took her hand then, his callous fingers gentle around hers. Fiona, I know we haven't known each other long, but I want you to know, Jack Reynolds. The shout from down the street interrupted whatever he had been about to say. They both turned to see a man weaving drunkenly toward them, hand hovering near the pistol at his hip. Jack moved subtly, positioning himself between Fiona and the approaching man. Go inside, he said quietly. Who is that? She whispered, recognizing danger in the stranger's unsteady gait and flushed face. Trouble. Please go inside and lock your door. The urgency in his voice brooked no argument. Fiona slipped through her door but left it cracked open, heart pounding as she watched through the narrow opening. The drunk stopped a few yards away, swaying slightly. Thought that was you. High and mighty Jack Reynolds, courting a lady like you belong in decent company. Jack's posture remained relaxed, but Fiona could see tension in the set of his shoulders. You're drunk, Mason. Go sleep it off. Don't tell me what to do. The man Mason spat on the ground. You think folks forgot what happened in Cheyenne? Think you can just ride into a new town and start fresh? I'm not looking for trouble. Mason's laugh was ugly. Should have thought of that before you killed my cousin. Fiona's hand flew to her mouth. Killed? Surely this was a drunken accusation, nothing more. That was self-defense, and the judge agreed. Jack said, his voice level. Your cousin drew on me. I'm sorry he died, but I'm not sorry I defended myself. Liar! Mason's hand moved to his gun, but Jack was faster. Don't, Jack warned, his own hand now resting openly on his pistol. Don't make me shoot another member of your family. For a tense moment, Fiona was certain violence would erupt right there on the street. Then Mason's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him as suddenly as it had flared. This ain't over, Reynolds. He backed away, stumbling slightly. Not by a long shot. Only when the man had disappeared around a corner did Jack relax his stance. He turned toward Fiona's door, his expression grim as he realized she had witnessed everything. You should come inside, she said quietly, opening the door wider. He hesitated, then nodded, following her up the narrow stairs to her small sitting room. A single lamp burned on the table, casting long shadows across the modest furniture. I owe you an explanation. Jack said, standing awkwardly by the door, hat in hand. You don't owe me anything. Fiona gestured to one of the two chairs flanking a small table. But I would like to understand, if you're willing to tell me. Jack sat, placing his hat on his knee. For a long moment he stared at his hands. 2 years ago, I was working cattle drives out of Cheyenne, he finally began. There was a man, Billy Mason, cousin to the fellow you just saw. Mean drunk with a reputation for starting fights. He looked up, meeting her eyes. One night at a saloon, he took offense when I refused to drink with him. Called me names, tried to provoke me. I walked away. He followed me outside, drew his gun. I was faster. The simple statement held no pride, only resignation. The sheriff arrested me, but witnesses confirmed my account. Judge ruled it self-defense and released me. Jack's fingers tightened on his hat brim. I left Cheyenne the next day. Didn't realize any of the Mason family was in these parts. Fiona absorbed his story, studying the man before her. There was shame in his posture, but no deception in his eyes. Thank you for telling me, she said finally. It can't be easy to speak of such things. Relief flickered across his features. Most women would show me the door after learning I've killed a man. I'm not most women. Fiona's voice was steady. And I believe in judging people by their actions, not by rumors or a past they can't change. Jack's expression softened. No, you certainly aren't most women. The tension broken, they talked for another hour, careful to keep the door to the sitting room open for propriety's sake. When Jack finally rose to leave, the night was fully dark outside the small window. I'd best get back to the ranch, he said reluctantly. Long ride ahead. At the door, he paused. About those letters. I would still very much like to receive them, Fiona assured him. His smile was worth every moment of uncertainty. Then you shall have them. True to his word, the first letter arrived 10 days later, delivered by a ranch hand making a supply run to town. Fiona recognized Jack's handwriting immediately on the envelope, neat but clearly labored, the letters formed with careful precision. Inside, 2 pages detailed life on the Triple R. Jack wrote of daily tasks, mending fences, doctoring cattle, breaking new horses with simple eloquence that painted vivid pictures in Fiona's mind. He mentioned plans for the northern grazing lands and asked about her work at the newspaper. The letter contained nothing overtly romantic, yet Fiona read it 3 times before carefully tucking it into her bureau drawer. That night she penned a reply by lamplight, filling 4 pages with news of Promise Creek and her own daily life. Thus began a correspondence that sustained them through 6 weeks of separation. Jack's letters arrived irregularly but dependably, sometimes containing pressed wildflowers or interesting stones he'd found while riding the range. Fiona sent clippings from the newspaper and once, a sketch she'd made of Promise Creek's main street from the hillside cemetery where they'd first truly spoken. As spring deepened into summer, Fiona found herself more settled in Promise Creek. Her work at the Chronicle expanded as Mr. Whitfield recognized her talents, allowing her to write small pieces and even conduct interviews with visiting officials or business owners. She made friends, too, Hattie from the millinery shop, Clara Jenkins, the doctor's wife, and Elena Alvarez, who insisted Fiona come for dinner at least once a week. To put meat on those bones. Together they formed a small but supportive circle that eased the loneliness of being so far from her Ohio home. Yet despite these new connections, it was Jack's letters she most treasured, and thoughts of him that occupied her quieter moments. She found herself wondering if what she felt was merely friendship born of their unusual meeting, or something deeper. The answer came on a sweltering July afternoon. Fiona was alone in the newspaper office, Mr. Whitfield having gone to interview a visiting railroad surveyor, when the door opened, bringing with it a gust of hot air and the jingle of spurs. She looked up from the article she was typing to find Jack Reynolds standing in the doorway, trailed dust on his clothes and uncertainty in his eyes. "Jack!" She rose quickly, nearly upsetting her inkwell. "I didn't expect your last letter said plans changed." He removed his hat, revealing hair damp with sweat. Mr. Rutherford decided we needed supplies before heading north. I volunteered. There was something in his voice, a tension she hadn't heard before. Is everything all right? She asked, moving around the desk. No. He stepped closer. It's not all right at all. Alarm shot through her. What's wrong? Are you hurt? Jack shook his head, frustration evident in the set of his jaw. I'm no good with words, Fiona. Not like you. Can't put things on paper the way I mean them. Your letters are wonderful, she protested. They don't say what I need to say. His eyes met hers, stormy with emotion. 6 weeks of writing, and I couldn't find the words to tell you that I think of you every day. That I see your face in my dreams. He faltered. Fiona's heart hammered against her ribs. That you what, Jack? That I'm falling in love with you. The words rushed out, as if he feared his courage might fail. I know it's too soon. I know you deserve better than a cowhand with nothing to his name but a saddle and a reputation. But I couldn't keep riding north without telling you face to face. Joy flooded through her, bright and overwhelming. Oh, Jack! You don't have to say anything, he continued hurriedly. I don't expect. Fiona closed the distance between them and placed her fingers gently against his lips, silencing him. I think about you too, she said softly. Every day. Hope kindled in his eyes. You do? Yes. She smiled up at him. I believe I may be falling in love with you too, Jack Reynolds. His hands, rough from work but infinitely gentle, came up to frame her face. May I kiss you, Fiona Miller? In answer, she rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, then deepened as Jack's arms slid around her waist, drawing her closer. Fiona's hands found their way to his shoulders, solid and steady beneath her touch. When they finally parted, both breathless, Jack rested his forehead against hers. I've been wanting to do that since the moment I saw you on that log, he admitted. Fiona laughed softly. I'm glad you waited. I wasn't in any state to appreciate it then. The sound of voices outside reminded them of their public location. Jack stepped back reluctantly, though he kept hold of her hand. How long can you stay in town? Fiona asked. Just tonight. We're leaving at first light. Regret colored his voice. But I'll be back in 2 weeks, maybe 3. And then? And then? His thumb traced circles on her palm. And then we'll talk about what comes next. If you're willing. I'm willing, she assured him. That evening, they dined again at Mrs. Alvarez's restaurant, this time openly as a couple. Elena beamed approvingly, serving them her finest dishes and refusing payment. For love, there is no charge, she insisted, waving away Jack's protests. Only promise you bring Fiona again when you return. They walked afterward, fingers intertwined, speaking of everything and nothing as the sun set behind the distant mountains. When they reached Fiona's door, Jack kissed her again, a sweet promise that left her dizzy with happiness. 2 weeks, he said against her lips. 2 weeks, she echoed. But it would be nearly a month before she saw Jack Reynolds again, and under circumstances either could have anticipated. The trouble began 3 days after Jack's departure. Fiona was walking to the newspaper office when she noticed a commotion near the bank. A crowd had gathered, voices raised in anger and concern. What's happened? She asked Clara Jenkins, who stood at the edge of the throng. Bank robbery, Clara replied grimly. 3 men rode in at opening, held Mr. Barnes at gunpoint, and took everything in the safe. Fiona gasped. Was anyone hurt? Barnes took a blow to the head when he tried to reach the shotgun under the counter, but Doc says he'll recover. Clara's expression darkened. They shot the young teller, though Jimmy Porter. He died before Doc could get to him. Horror washed over Fiona. Jimmy Porter was barely 20, newly married to Mary Simmons from the dressmaker's shop. Those poor people. Do they know who did it? Sheriff formed a posse right away. They're saying one of the robbers might have been Lem Mason. The name sent a chill through Fiona. Mason? Any relation to the drunk who confronted your cowboy a while back? Same family? Bad lot, all of them. Clara shook her head. Town's been on edge ever since. The atmosphere in Promise Creek remained tense in the days that followed. The bank robbery posse returned empty-handed, having lost the trail in the rocky terrain north of town. Young Jimmy Porter was laid to rest in the hillside cemetery, his widow's sobs echoing across the valley. And rumors began to circulate, whispers that grew louder with each passing day. Fiona first heard them from Hattie, who came upstairs one evening, face drawn with concern. "People are talking, Fiona," she said without preamble. "About Jack Reynolds." Fiona set aside the mending she'd been working on. "What about him?" "They're saying he might have been involved with the bank robbery. That he was in town just days before, could have been scouting the place." Hattie wrung her hands. "And with his connection to the Masons, connection?" Fiona stood abruptly. "Jack has no connection to those people except that one of them threatened him in the street." "I know that, but folks are saying different. Saying he and Lem Mason were seen together in Cheyenne, before the incident with Billy Mason." Cold dread settled in Fiona's stomach. "That's absurd. Jack would never, I know," Hattie said quickly. "I'm just telling you what's being said. Sheriff's asking questions about him." Over the next week, the rumors intensified. Mr. Whitfield, to his credit, refused to print anything without evidence, despite pressure from some prominent citizens. But the damage was being done regardless. Fiona defended Jack fiercely to anyone who would listen, but she could feel opinions hardening against her as well. Whispers followed her in the street. A woman at the general store pointedly moved to another counter when Fiona approached. No letters came from Jack or the R, adding to her anxiety. Had he heard the accusations? Was he staying away to protect her reputation? Or had something happened to him? Nearly 3 weeks after Jack's departure, Fiona was working late at the newspaper office when the door burst open. Sheriff Taylor stood in the doorway, expression grim. "Miss Miller, I need you to come with me." Fear clutched at her heart. "Has something happened? Is it Jack? Reynolds is at my office. Says he won't speak to anyone but you." The sheriff's tone made it clear he disapproved. "I wouldn't normally allow this, but given the circumstances." "What circumstances? Is he under arrest?" Sheriff Taylor's silence was answer enough. Fiona grabbed her shawl and followed him into the street, ignoring the curious stares of passers-by. The sheriff's office was at the far end of Main Street, a solid building that also housed the town's small jail. Inside, a deputy sat at a desk near the entrance. Beyond him, a door led to the cells in the rear. The sheriff nodded to his deputy and led Fiona through. Jack sat on a narrow cot in the first cell, elbows on his knees, head bowed. He looked up at their approach, and Fiona gasped at the sight of his face. A purple bruise spread across his left cheekbone, and a cut above his eye had been roughly bandaged. "Jack! What happened to you?" He stood as they neared the cell. "I'm all right, Fiona." Sheriff Taylor unlocked the door. 10 minutes, he said curtly. "I'll be right outside." When they were alone, Fiona rushed to Jack, hands reaching for his bruised face. "Who did this to you?" "Doesn't matter." He captured her hands in his. "Listen to me. I didn't rob that bank. I had nothing to do with it. I know that." Her voice was fierce. "I never doubted you for a second." Relief washed over his features. "Thank you for that." He guided her to sit beside him on the cot. "But the sheriff doesn't share your confidence. They found me at the R, dragged me back here in irons. On what evidence?" "Mason's talking. Says I planned the whole thing, then double-crossed them by not showing up for the actual robbery." Jack's jaw tightened. "It's his word against mine, and right now, his carries more weight." "That's ridiculous. You were heading north with the Rutherford herd. We were delayed. Cattle spooked during a thunderstorm, scattered halfway to hell. Took us days to round them up." He raked a hand through his hair. "By the time we got word about the robbery, Mason had already spun his tale. Fiona's mind raced. Mr. Rutherford and the other hands can vouch for you, surely? They're trying. But Mason claims I rode out alone the night before the robbery, said I had business in town. Jack's eyes held hers. I wasn't anywhere near Promise Creek that day, Fiona. I swear it on my life. I believe you. She squeezed his hands. We'll prove your innocence. There must be something. The cell door clanged open as Sheriff Taylor returned. Time's up, Miss Miller. Fiona stood reluctantly. I'll be back tomorrow. And I'll speak to Mr. Whitfield, he has influence in town. Jack nodded, his expression softening. Thank you for coming. For believing in me. Always, she promised. Outside, in the gathering dusk, Fiona turned to the sheriff. You're making a terrible mistake. Jack Reynolds is innocent. Sheriff Taylor's weathered face revealed nothing. That's for a judge to decide, Miss Miller. The circuit judge arrives next week. Next week? You can't keep him locked up that long on the word of a known criminal. I can and I will. The sheriff's tone was final. Mason may be no saint, but Reynolds has a history too. Man who's killed once might do it again. Fiona bristled. That was self-defense, and you know it. So he claims. Sheriff Taylor tipped his hat, a clear dismissal. Good evening, Miss Miller. Fiona stood on the boardwalk, watching him return to the jailhouse. Anger and fear warred within her, but beneath them, determination took root. Jack needed her now, and she would not fail him. She turned and walked purposefully toward the newspaper office. James Whitfield was still there, as she'd hoped, working on the layout for the next day's edition. I need your help, she said without preamble. Whitfield looked up, startled by her vehemence. What's happened? Fiona told him everything about Jack's arrest, Mason's accusations, and the lack of any real evidence. The man's being railroaded, she concluded. All because he once had the misfortune to be attacked by a member of the Mason family. Whitfield removed his spectacles, polishing them thoughtfully. What exactly do you expect me to do, Miss Miller? Use the newspaper. Question the sheriff's actions. Point out the flaws in Mason's story. Make people think before they condemn an innocent man. That's a tall order. He replaced his spectacles. And not without risk. The Chronicle depends on the goodwill of this community. Fiona leaned forward, palms flat on his desk. Mr. Whitfield, you've always said a newspaper's duty is to the truth, not to comfort or convenience. If that's so, then Jack Reynolds deserves your voice now more than ever. For a long moment, Whitfield studied her, his expression unreadable. Then he sighed. Very well. I'll write an editorial questioning the arrest. But, he added as Fiona's face lit with hope, that's all I can do without more evidence. Thank you. Fiona straightened. There is one more thing. I'd like to speak with Lem Mason. Whitfield's eyebrows shot up. The sheriff will never allow that. Perhaps not. A plan was forming in Fiona's mind. But there are other ways to reach a prisoner. The next morning, Fiona rose early and dressed with particular care. She chose her plainest dress, pinned her hair severely, and added a pair of wire-rimmed spectacles she sometimes used for close work at the newspaper. At the sheriff's office, she introduced herself as Miss Franklin from the Territorial Christian Society, come to offer spiritual guidance to the prisoners. Sheriff's not here, the young deputy told her, clearly bored with his morning duty. Won't be back till noon. That's quite all right, Fiona replied in her most prim voice. I'll just speak with the prisoners briefly. I have brought scripture for their edification. She held up the Bible she'd borrowed from her landlady. The deputy shrugged. Suit yourself. We got two back there, Reynolds and Mason. Keep your distance from the bars, madam. Fiona nodded demurely and followed him to the cells. Jack was in the first one, as before, while Mason occupied the cell at the far end. Jack's eyes widened in recognition when he saw her, but she gave an imperceptible shake of her head. I'll start with this one, she told the deputy, indicating Mason's cell. Perhaps you could wait up front? These conversations are often of a personal nature. The deputy looked relieved at the suggestion. Holler if you need anything, madam. When he had gone, Fiona approached Mason's cell. The man was sprawled on his cot, watching her with suspicious eyes. I ain't interested in no Bible talk, he growled. Good, because I'm not offering any. Fiona removed the spectacles. My name is Fiona Miller. I work for the Promise Creek Chronicle, and I want to hear your side of the story about the bank robbery. Mason sat up, interest kindling. You're Reynolds' woman. I'm here as a journalist, she replied coolly. Mr. Whitfield is writing an article about the robbery, and we want to ensure all perspectives are represented fairly. This was stretching the truth considerably, but Fiona maintained her professional demeanor. She had observed Mr. Whitfield enough to know how to conduct an interview that would put a subject at ease. What's in it for me? Mason asked, suspicious. Your version of events, in your own words, published for all to read. Fiona held his gaze. Isn't that what you want? For people to know what really happened? Flattery and the promise of attention worked their magic. Mason moved closer to the bars, eager now. Reynolds was supposed to be our inside man, he began. Knew the bank layout, knew when the money shipment was coming in. But he got cold feet, didn't show for the job. And how did you and Jack Reynolds come to plan this together? Fiona pressed. Were you friends before? Mason snorted. Friends? After what he did to my cousin? Nah, he owed us. Said he'd make it right by helping with the bank job. I see. And where did you meet to make these plans? Saloon outside of town. Old mining camp, abandoned now except for the bar. Mason scratched his stubbled chin. Met there 3 times. Last time was just before the job the night of the big storm. Fiona's heart leaped. The storm Jack had mentioned, when the cattle scattered. You're certain of the date? Course I'm certain. Near drowned riding back that night. And Jack was definitely there? You saw him clearly? What kind of question is that? Course I saw him. Fiona made a show of writing in a small notebook she'd brought. Can anyone else confirm this meeting took place? The barkeeper, perhaps? Mason shifted uneasily. Weren't nobody else there. Just me and Reynolds and my partners. Your partners who are now conveniently gone, Fiona observed. They lit out after the job went bad. Probably halfway to Mexico by now. Fiona closed her notebook. Thank you, Mr. Mason. This has been most illuminating. She moved away from his cell, ignoring his questions about when the article would appear. At Jack's cell, she paused only long enough to whisper, I'll be back this afternoon. I have an idea. Back at the newspaper office, Fiona found Mr. Whitfield putting the finishing touches on his editorial. I need to borrow the Chronicle's horse and buggy, she announced. Whitfield looked up, startled. Whatever for? To save an innocent man. Fiona quickly related what she'd learned from Mason. The abandoned mining camp saloon, it must be Bitter Creek. That's less than 3 hours' ride from here. And what do you expect to find there? Mason already said there were no witnesses. He's lying, Fiona said confidently. A man like that, spinning tales to save his own skin? He's bound to have slipped up somewhere. And I intend to find out where. Whitfield studied her for a long moment. This is highly irregular, Miss Miller. So is condemning a man on the word of a known criminal. Fiona met his gaze steadily. Please, Mr. Whitfield. I have to try. With a sigh, the editor reached into his desk and withdrew a key. The buggy's behind the office. Be careful, Fiona. Bitter Creek isn't the safest place for a woman alone. I won't be alone for long, she replied, already heading for the door. I'll be back before dark. The journey to Bitter Creek took longer than Fiona had anticipated. The trail was rough in places, forcing her to slow the horse to a walk. By the time the ramshackle collection of buildings came into view, the sun was high overhead. The mining camp had clearly seen better days. Most of the structures were in various states of collapse, their wood weathered to silver gray. Only the saloon showed signs of occupation, a few horses tethered outside, smoke rising from the chimney. Fiona tied the buggy horse to a post and straightened her clothing. She had changed into a more suitable traveling outfit before leaving town, but she still felt conspicuously out of place as she pushed open the saloon doors. Inside, the air was thick with tobacco smoke and the sour smell of stale beer. 4 men sat at a table playing cards, while a 5th dozed in a corner. Behind the bar, a heavy-set man with a magnificent mustache polished glasses with a dubious-looking cloth. All activity ceased as Fiona entered. 5 pairs of eyes turned to her with expressions ranging from surprise to open hostility. "Good afternoon, gentlemen," she said, her voice steadier than her nerves. "I'm looking for information." The barkeeper recovered first. "This ain't no place for a lady, miss. Best be on your way." Fiona approached the bar, removing her gloves deliberately. "I'm with the Promise Creek Chronicle. I'm investigating the recent bank robbery, and I have reason to believe some of the planning may have occurred here." One of the card players spat on the floor. "We don't know nothing about no robbery." "Perhaps not," Fiona conceded. "But I'm told Lem Mason met with associates here the night of the big thunderstorm, just over 3 weeks ago. He claims Jack Reynolds was among them." The barkeeper's hands stilled on the glass he was polishing. Something flickered in his eyes, recognition, perhaps. "I don't recall," he said slowly. Fiona leaned forward. "Mr. Donovan. Joe Donovan. Mr. Donovan, an innocent man's life may depend on what you do or don't recall. Jack Reynolds is facing a hangman's noose based on Lem Mason's word alone." Donovan set down the glass. "Mason's a liar and a cheat. Owes me $15 from last winter." Hope stirred in Fiona's chest. "Then you know him?" "Know him well enough to bar him from my establishment 2 months back, after he pulled a knife on one of my regular customers." Donovan's mustache twitched with displeasure. "Haven't served him a drop since." "So he wasn't here the night of the storm?" Fiona pressed. Donovan shrugged. "Didn't say that. He came in with 2 fellows I didn't recognize. Told him to clear out, but they took a table in the corner anyway. Figured it wasn't worth the trouble to force them out." "And was Jack Reynolds with them?" "Don't know no Jack Reynolds." The barkeeper frowned in concentration. "But I know them 3 was the only ones here that night. Storm was so bad most folks stayed home. I was about to close up when they arrived." Fiona's heart raced. "You're certain? There were only 3 men?" "Course I'm certain. I may be getting old, but I can still count to 3. Donovan folded his arms across his chest. "Just Mason and his 2 friends. Nobody else." Triumph surged through her. "Mr. Donovan, would you be willing to come to Promise Creek and tell Sheriff Taylor what you just told me?" The barkeeper looked uncomfortable. "Don't much like getting involved in other folks' troubles." "Please." Fiona met his gaze earnestly. "A good man's life is at stake." Donovan sighed heavily. "Let me close up here. I'll follow you back to town." The ride back to Promise Creek seemed interminable to Fiona, even with Donovan's wagon following close behind. The afternoon was waning by the time they reached the sheriff's office. Sheriff Taylor was at his desk, reviewing wanted posters. He looked up with obvious surprise as Fiona entered, Donovan at her heels. "Miss Miller, what's the meaning of this?" "Sheriff, this is Joe Donovan from the Bitter Creek Saloon. He has information about Lem Mason that proves Jack Reynolds could not have been involved in planning the bank robbery." The sheriff's expression remained skeptical, but he gestured for Donovan to speak. The barkeeper repeated his account: Mason's banishment from the saloon, his appearance with only 2 companions on the night of the storm, and the certainty that Jack Reynolds had not been among them. "Mason claims Reynolds met with him that night to plan the robbery," Sheriff Taylor said when Donovan finished. "Why should I believe you over him?" "Because I got no reason to lie," Donovan replied bluntly. "Mason does. He's looking at a hanging and wants company on the gallows. And because there's more." Fiona added. She withdrew a folded paper from her reticule, the letter she'd received from Jack the day before he'd supposedly met with Mason. This letter was delivered to me by Hank Davis, one of the Triple R hands. Jack wrote that they were moving the herd north the next day. He couldn't have been in Bitter Creek that night. He was 30 miles away at the ranch. Sheriff Taylor studied the letter, then looked up at Fiona with narrowed eyes. This proves nothing, Miss Miller. Reynolds could have written this to establish an alibi. Sheriff Taylor. Fiona's patience snapped. You have Mason, a known criminal with a grudge against Jack, making accusations without a shred of evidence. Meanwhile, a reputable witness places Mason elsewhere, and Jack has multiple ranch hands who can vouch for his whereabouts. How can you possibly justify keeping him locked up? The sheriff's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, the door opened to admit James Whitfield. The newspaper editor nodded to Fiona before addressing the sheriff. I've just come from the Rutherford Ranch, he announced. Spoke with Mr. Rutherford himself and 3 of his hands. They all confirm Reynolds was at the ranch the night of the storm and the following morning when the cattle scattered. He couldn't possibly have been in Bitter Creek or Promise Creek. Sheriff Taylor's expression clouded. You went behind my back, Whitfield? I went in search of the truth, as any good newspaperman would. Whitfield's tone was unapologetic. And I found it. Reynolds is innocent. For a tense moment, the sheriff looked as if he might argue further. Then his shoulders slumped slightly. I'll need statements from everyone, he said grudgingly. Donovan, Rutherford, the hands. All properly sworn and signed. Of course, Whitfield agreed. And in the meantime? Sheriff Taylor rose from his desk. In the meantime, I suppose I owe Reynolds an apology. Relief washed over Fiona as the sheriff moved toward the cells. She followed, heart pounding, as he unlocked Jack's cell and explained the situation. Jack listened in silence, his expression unreadable. Only when the sheriff had finished and stepped aside did he move, crossing swiftly to where Fiona stood. You did this, he said softly, wonder in his voice. You saved me. We did it together, she corrected, gesturing to Whitfield and Donovan. And because the truth was on our side. Jack's hands came up to frame her face, heedless of their audience. I don't deserve you, Fiona Miller. Perhaps not, she replied with a tremulous smile. But you have me all the same. His kiss was gentle but fervent, a promise and a thank you rolled into one. When they parted, Fiona was aware of Sheriff Taylor clearing his throat awkwardly. You're free to go, Reynolds, he said gruffly. But I'll need you to stay in town until all the statements are properly filed. Yes, sir. Jack's arms slid around Fiona's waist. I find I have reason to stay in town anyway. Outside, the late afternoon sun bathed Promise Creek in golden light. Jack inhaled deeply, as if savoring the taste of freedom. What happens now? Fiona asked as they walked slowly down the street, his arms still around her waist. Jack glanced down at her, his expression thoughtful. Now I send word to the Triple R that I'll be delayed a few more days. Then I find a proper place to stay while the sheriff sorts out this mess. He paused. And then, if you're willing, we talk about the future. Our future? Fiona's heart quickened. I hope so. Jack stopped walking, turning to face her. Fiona, I know this isn't the most romantic setting, and I haven't had time to do this properly, but Jack Reynolds. The shout came from behind them. They turned to see Lem Mason standing in the middle of the street, a pistol in his hand. Somehow, he had escaped his cell. Get down! Jack pushed Fiona toward the shelter of a nearby doorway just as Mason fired. The bullet whined past them, embedding itself in the wooden facade of the building. Jack stepped into the street, positioning himself between Mason and Fiona. This is between you and me, Mason, he called. Let's end it here. Mason's face twisted with hatred. Should have killed you in Cheyenne when I had the chance. Should have avenged Billy proper. Your cousin drew on me first, Jack replied evenly. I didn't want to kill him, but he left me no choice. Liar! Mason raised his pistol again. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Mason fired. Jack dove to the side, drawing his own weapon as he rolled. 2 more shots rang out almost simultaneously, one from Jack's gun, one from the direction of the sheriff's office. When the echo of gunfire faded, Mason lay motionless in the dirt. Sheriff Taylor stood in the doorway of his office, rifle in hand. And Jack was pushing himself to his feet, blood staining his left shirt sleeve. "Jack!" Fiona rushed to his side. "You're hurt," he grimaced, pressing his right hand against the wound. "Just grazed me. I'll be fine. Let me be the judge of that." Sheriff Taylor approached, rifle still at the ready. He knelt beside Mason's body, checking for signs of life before shaking his head. "He's gone. Looks like we both hit him." Jack nodded grimly. "I didn't want it to end this way." "Sometimes we don't get to choose," the sheriff replied. He straightened, addressing the gathering crowd. "Show's over, folks. Someone fetch Doc Jenkins." Within minutes, Fiona had Jack seated in the doctor's office, his bloodied shirt removed as Dr. Jenkins examined the wound. "Clean through the muscle," the doctor pronounced. "Painful, but not serious. You're a lucky man, Mr. Reynolds." "Don't I know it?" Jack replied, his eyes finding Fiona's. After the wound was cleaned and bandaged, Dr. Jenkins prescribed rest and left them alone while he prepared a pain powder. Jack reached for Fiona's hand. "This isn't exactly how I planned it," he said ruefully. "Planned what?" Jack's expression grew serious. "Before Mason interrupted us, I was about to ask if you would consider becoming my wife." Fiona's breath caught. "Jack, I know I don't have much to offer," he continued hurriedly. "But I love you, Fiona. These past weeks, all I could think about was getting back to you. And when I was in that cell, believing I might hang for something I didn't do, my only regret was that I hadn't told you how much you mean to me." Tears welled in Fiona's eyes. "You have everything to offer that matters, Jack Reynolds. And yes, I will marry you." His smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "Are you sure?" "I'm just a cowhand, you're the man I love," she interrupted firmly. "The man who sat quietly beside me when I needed silence. The man who held my hand when I was ready. The man who has shown me nothing but kindness and respect from the moment we met." She leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his. "That's all I need." Their kiss was gentle, mindful of Jack's injury, but filled with promise. When they parted, he kept hold of her hand. "I'll speak to Mr. Rutherford," he said. "He's been talking about making me foreman when old Bailey retires next spring. It would mean a steady wage, maybe even a small house on the property. I can continue at the newspaper," Fiona added. "At least until—" She blushed. Jack's smile deepened. "Until what, Miss Miller?" "Until we start a family," she replied softly. "If that's what you want." "It's everything I want." His eyes held hers, full of love and certainty. "A home, children, a life with you. More than I ever thought I'd have." Dr. Jenkins returned then, ending their private moment. But the plans they'd begun to make continued to unfold in the days and weeks that followed. Sheriff Taylor filed his report on the Mason shooting, officially clearing Jack of any wrongdoing in both that incident and the bank robbery. The town, quick to condemn, proved equally quick to embrace Jack once his innocence was established. Mrs. Alvarez hosted a celebratory dinner at her restaurant, refusing payment yet again. "For family," she insisted, patting Jack's uninjured arm. "Soon you will be family, yes?" They were married on a crisp October morning, with the aspens turning gold on the hillsides. The ceremony took place in Promise Creek's small church, with James Whitfield giving the bride away and Mr. Rutherford standing as Jack's best man. Fiona wore a dress of ivory silk ordered from Denver, with lace at the collar and cuffs that Clara Jenkins had helped her select. Jack looked handsome and slightly uncomfortable in a new suit, his dark hair freshly trimmed. "I, Jack, take thee, Fiona," he vowed, his voice strong and clear despite the emotion evident in his eyes. To have and to hold, from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. Fiona repeated the vows, her heart so full she could barely speak the words. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Jack's kiss was both tender and possessive, a promise of the life they would build together. The wedding breakfast at the hotel was a joyous affair, attended by most of the town. Even Sheriff Taylor made an appearance, awkwardly presenting them with a silver picture frame. "For your first family portrait," he explained gruffly. "When the time comes." By early afternoon, Jack and Fiona were on their way to the Triple R, where Mr. Rutherford had insisted they stay in the main house until the foreman's cabin could be prepared for them. "It's not much," Jack said apologetically as they drove the wagon along the winding road to the ranch. "Nothing like what you had back east." Fiona leaned against his shoulder, contentment warming her despite the autumn chill. "It's everything I want, Jack. A home with you." He smiled down at her, love shining in his eyes. "That log where I found you, did you know I ride past it every time I go to town? Always tip my hat to it." "Do you?" She laughed softly. "Why?" "Because that's where my life really began." He kissed the top of her head. "Where I found you, and where you eventually took my hand." Fiona nestled closer, thinking of all the twists and turns that had brought her to this moment, the loss of her brother, the uncertainty of her future, the quiet cowboy who had sat beside her in her darkest hour. "I love you, Jack Reynolds," she whispered. "And I love you, Mrs. Reynolds," he replied, his arm tightening around her. "For all the days of my life." As the wagon crested a hill, the Triple R spread out before them, rolling pastures, sturdy barns, the main house with smoke rising from its chimney. Their new home. Their future. Behind them, Promise Creek grew smaller in the distance, the place where their story had begun. Ahead lay everything they would build together, a home, a family, a life filled with love that had started so simply, with a cowboy who found a grieving woman sitting on a log at the edge of town, and sat quietly until she took his hand. 5 years later, on a warm spring afternoon, Jack Reynolds stood on the porch of the foreman's cabin, watching his wife and daughter in the garden. Fiona knelt in the rich soil, showing 4-year-old Sarah how to plant bean seeds in neat rows. "Not too deep, sweetheart," she instructed, guiding the child's small hands. "Just like tucking them in for a nap." Sarah nodded solemnly, her dark hair so like her father's escaping from its braids. "And then they grow up?" "Yes, with sunshine and water and time." Fiona smiled up at Jack, catching him watching them. "Just like you're growing." Jack returned her smile, marveling as he often did at his good fortune. In the 5 years since their wedding day, life had blessed them abundantly. He had become foreman of the Triple R as promised, earning a salary that provided comfortably for his family. Fiona had continued working at the newspaper until Sarah's birth, and now contributed occasional articles from home. Their cabin, once a simple 2-room structure, had expanded with Jack's own hands. He'd added a proper bedroom for Sarah, a larger kitchen where Fiona could pursue her newfound love of baking, and a covered porch where they gathered on summer evenings to watch the sunset. "Papa!" Sarah noticed him at last, abandoning her gardening to run to him with outstretched arms. "We're planting beans." Jack swept her up, settling her on his hip. "I see that. You're being a big help to Mama, aren't you?" "The biggest," she confirmed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Can we ride horseback after supper?" "You promised." "So I did." Jack pressed a kiss to her forehead. "If Mama says it's all right." Fiona rose from the garden, brushing soil from her apron. "As long as you both wear your hats. The sun's still strong even in the evening." She joined them on the porch, and Jack's free arm went naturally around her waist. The slight swell of her belly pressed against him, their second child, due in the autumn. "Mrs. Alvarez sent word she's coming for dinner tomorrow," Fiona said, leaning into his embrace. "She's bringing that flan Sarah likes so much." "And cinnamon bread?" Jack asked hopefully. Fiona laughed. Probably. You know she thinks you're too thin. Papa's not thin, Sarah protested, patting Jack's cheek. He's strong. That he is, Fiona agreed, her eyes meeting Jack's with familiar warmth. The strongest man I know. Later, after Sarah was tucked into bed with stories and kisses, Jack and Fiona sat together on the porch swing. The spring night was mild, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. From the distance came the low music of frogs and night birds, a peaceful chorus that had become the soundtrack of their life together. I had a letter from Mr. Whitfield today, Fiona said, her head resting on Jack's shoulder. He's thinking of retiring next year. Wants to know if I'd consider taking over the Chronicle. Jack looked down at her in surprise. The whole newspaper? That's quite an opportunity. It is. She traced idle patterns on his palm. But it would mean moving back to town, changing everything we've built here. Is it something you want? Fiona considered this. Part of me does. I love the work, the challenge of it. But, she placed her hand over her rounded belly. Our life is here now. Our family. Jack covered her hand with his. We could make it work, if it's what you truly want. The R isn't so far from town. I could ride in evenings, weekends. You'd do that? Rearrange your whole life? Fiona. Jack turned to face her fully. 5 years ago, you believed in me when no one else would. You fought for me, risked everything for me. If running that newspaper is your dream, then I'll do whatever it takes to help you achieve it. Tears glistened in her eyes. What did I ever do to deserve you, Jack Reynolds? I ask myself the same question about you every day. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. Always. She leaned forward to kiss him, a gesture that still held all the tenderness and passion of their early days. I think, she said when they parted, that I'll tell Mr. Whitfield I'm honored, but my place is here. At least for now, while the children are young. She smiled. Though I might suggest we discuss it again in a few years. Jack nodded, understanding her compromise. Sounds wise. And in the meantime? In the meantime, I have more than enough to keep me busy. She nestled against him as he set the swing in gentle motion. Our home, our children, my occasional writing. It's a good life, Jack. The best, he agreed softly. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness settled fully around them. Jack thought of the day he'd first seen Fiona, sitting alone and grief-stricken on that fallen log. He'd approached her on instinct, drawn by something he couldn't name but recognized deep in his soul. He'd had no idea then where that moment would lead through danger and joy, hardship and abundance, to this peaceful evening with the woman he loved and the family they'd created. What are you thinking about? Fiona asked, sensing his contemplation. Jack smiled into the darkness. About beginnings. About how the most important journey of my life started when a beautiful woman took my hand on a log at the edge of town. Fiona's fingers intertwined with his, a gesture as familiar now as breathing. And I'm thinking about how that journey continues, every day, with each choice we make together. I love you, Fiona Reynolds, Jack whispered, his lips brushing her temple. And I love you, she replied, her voice carrying all the certainty of their shared years. For all the days of my life. The promise hung in the air between them, as solid and enduring as the mountains that surrounded their home. As the swing rocked gently beneath them, Jack knew with absolute clarity that no matter what challenges lay ahead, no matter what opportunities or obstacles they might face, their love born in a moment of quiet connection would sustain them through it all. In the quiet of the Wyoming night, the cowboy who had once found a grieving woman sitting on a log held her close, grateful beyond words for the day she had taken his hand and his heart and changed his life forever.